I must congratulate Manthan for taking the initiative to have a talk on Nehru, and I'm so impressed that to hear about Nehru there are still so many people. But I congratulate Manthan because in today's time it takes courage to even have a function with Nehru's name. It's not without any danger now to have a function with Nehru's name. Fortunately though, even though the fear of the current regime is not as great, it is not as pervasive as it is in the cow belt from where I come. So when we come to the south, we almost immediately breathe a slightly more freer air, apart from a cleaner air. As you know, we come from the most polluted environmentally and political part of the country. So thank you for letting us come here. As I said, it needs courage. I want to highlight this, that just 2 weeks ago, a book fair in a central university in Uttarakhand, where they were to have Nehru's and Gandhi's books, was not allowed because a group of the RSS students wing, the ABVP group, came up and said that this cannot be allowed, so it was not allowed. I was invited to speak on Nehru and the making of modern India in a central university in Delhi, and in this case I don't want to name and shame which university it was, but just the day before my talk, I was told that, can you please drop Nehru's name from it? You say what you want to say, but let's not have Nehru's name, because the powers that be do not want it like that. The stalwarts of our national movement, whether it be Nehru or Gandhiji, are being demonized today. And I don't think it is a matter we can take lightly. We have to remember that it was the demonizing of Gandhiji that was done for about 2 to 3 years in a massive manner by the leaders of the RSS, people like Golwalkar, and by the Hindu Mahasabha, which led to the situation that he was assassinated. Godse just happened to be one of them. Somebody or the other would have done it. Such was the hatred that was spread about him. And the result, of course, was that after he was assassinated, they called it Asurvad. That is, the demon had been killed. And as you know, they distributed sweets. And Sardar Patel had to scold Shama Prasad Mukherjee and point it out that how do you write to me to release the RSS people who were arrested, as you know, after Gandhiji's murder. But don't you know that they distribute sweets when to celebrate Gandhiji's martyrdom? This demonization of Gandhiji continues till today. As you know, a sitting MP called Godse a Deshbhakt, and she continues to be a sitting MP. This is Pragya Thakur from Madhya Pradesh. And the demonizing of Nehru now occurs at an unprecedented level. As I've written in my book, every pothole in the country, the responsibility is put on Nehru's shoulders. There is a website called Dismantling Nehru. If you were to Google Nehru, the first thing you'll probably hit is this website, which is enormously funded. And it's a very detailed website which tries to undo Nehru. And the subtitle of the website is Dismantling Nehru, the last Viceroy of India. In other words, British rule did not end. Nehru was the last Viceroy, and so on. I'll just give you 1 or 2 more examples. You know, before I talk about Nehru, we must realize that what we are facing. There are textbooks in BJP-ruled Rajasthan on the period of the national movement and of the first few decades of the building of independent India, in which they have forgotten to mention Nehru's name. He doesn't exist. He spent 30 years of his life fighting the British, 9 of those years in jail, but he doesn't even enter a textbook written about the most productive part of his life, including 17 years as the Prime Minister. He's not there. The Indian Council for Historical Research, which is supposed to promote research in history in the country, to celebrate the 75th year of India's independence, put up a poster in which they had photographs of many nationalist leaders, Gandhi, Tilak, etc. But they forgot to put Nehru. And instead of Nehru, they put Savarkar, the person, as you know, who within a few months of being imprisoned, made a series of petitions apologizing and promising loyalty to the British, saying that, please, I'm like your prodigal son, forgive me, I will do your bidding, kind of thing, which he did after he was released. For the next few years, he did exactly that, prove his loyalty to the British and stand up against the Indian national movement. It is not only Nehru and Gandhi who are under attack. It is our entire national movement, the entire freedom struggle, which is under attack. And I will try to explain why it is so. 2 weeks ago, the RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat, said that the real independence in India has come with the Pran Pratishtha of the Ram temple. You remember? In 2024 January, your Prime Minister, dressed as a priest, did the Pran Pratishtha. And while doing, he said, Dev is Des and Ram is Rashtra. So when he gave out the bugle, you know, that this is what independence is all about. Hindu Rashtra is almost there. And the RSS chief says that real independence only came there. I don't think that they're probably saying it on the basis of a study of history, but they certainly follow this starlet called Kangana Raut, who said in 2014 that Asli Azadi came with 2014 with Modi. So when people said, what about 1947? The 1947 to hame bheek mein mili. And the British really continued. It was an extension of British rule. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a paradigm, whether it is Mohan Bhagwat or whether it is Madam Kangana Raut, they're speaking the same language. The Prime Minister and Mohan Bhagwat say now, with the Ram temple, sometimes 500, sometimes 1,000 years, because a few hundred years do not make a difference to them either, obviously. So after 1,000 years of struggle, finally independence has come from foreign rule. But the British were here for less than 200 years. So what is the dog whistle? The dog whistle is that it is the Muslims that we have got freedom from by building the Ram temple. So this 1947 ki azadi bheek mein mili, with one stroke, you've made from Dadabhai Naoroji, Tilak, Gandhi, Patel, Subhash Bose, Bhagat Singh, all of them into beggars. After all, azadi thodi mili thi unke aane se. And for this wonderful discovery, Kangana Raut got the ticket as a BJP candidate and is now a member of parliament from Himachal. It is significant that those who attack the national movement and its stalwarts are precisely those who did not participate in the freedom struggle. So why do they need to negate the actual freedom struggle? There are two reasons. Firstly, they now want to occupy the nationalist space. After all, they are the ones who now sort of tom-tom their chests and saying, we are the nationalists, and all you guys who attend meetings like this are the Deshdrohis, you know, the Parjivis. You must have heard various descriptions of yourself. In Hyderabad, it's difficult to say Lutyens Delhi, but I'm sure you know what is the equivalent of Lutyens Delhi for people like you. So that's one reason, that they want to masquerade as the real nationalists. If you want to be the real nationalist, then you have to deny the actual national movement. because that was not national movement at all. We were not part of it because that was not the national movement. The real national movement is what they are doing. The second reason is that they were opposed to all the core values of our India's freedom struggle, what Rabindranath Tagore called the idea of India. So every value which can be considered the essence of our freedom struggle, which is what the idea of India is, they were opposed to. And even at the cost of repetition, I'll go over what are these essential values of the national movement on which there was a consensus from the left to the right. There were, A, that independence and sovereignty would be critical elements in our struggle against the British, as well as after India is independent, it will oppose imperial domination, not support the massacre of Gaza, for example, or genuflect in front of Mr. Trump selling your country. That was not to be the vision that we had. Number two, India would be a democracy. It's a very essential idea of our freedom struggle. As early as 1890s, Tilak is talking of adult franchise. Mind you, Europe, decades later, is still fighting for the right of the woman to have a vote. And the United States, where everyone, particularly from this part of the world, want to run to, were in the 1960s still fighting for civil rights for the blacks. Whether he can come and sit next to you, leave alone vote. But the Indian freedom struggle from the late 19th century was very clear that their vision of the future India would be a democracy. Third element was secularism. India would be a secular democracy. And these two phrases were used conjointly. If you look at the literature during the period of the national movement, you would find the phrase secular democracy being used conjointly. Because you couldn't be one without the other. You couldn't be a democracy which said, we are a democracy, but we are a democracy for Hindus. The Christians and the Muslims can go take a walk. I mean, you wouldn't be a democracy in that case, isn't it? So they used it conjointly, just as communalism was conjoint with loyalism. Communal loyalist, and then with Nehru's intervention, communalism was conjoint with fascism. And it is Amartya Sen who made this term communal fascism into common currency. But Nehru had been talking about the essence of the communal strands, whether it is Muslim League or the Hindu Mahasabha, that how it was fascist. I'll have something to say on that. So this was the second element. And the important thing about this second element of secularism and democracy was that the vision of India was an inclusive India which would celebrate diversity. Now I want to spend 2 minutes on this because, I mean, we are proud about all sorts of impossible things like, we used to fly aeroplanes in ancient India. But we are not proud about what we can actually be proud of. This vision of the Indian nation was unique in world history. When nation states emerged in the world, and they emerged in Europe, roughly from the 17th century onwards, they emerged with the notion of one language, one religion. Catholic France, not even Christian, Protestant England, unification of Germany on the basis of language, unification of Italy on the basis of language. France was a multilingual country and it was flattened out into one language country after the French Revolution. In that situation, our nationalists, and by that definition, the British said, how can India be a nation? In the 19th century, they used to describe India as a geographical expression between this latitude and that longitude. We are still referred to as South Asia. Nation concept cannot apply to India. They said because there's too many languages and too many religions, etc. In that situation, to imagine a nation which would celebrate diversity, the more the languages, the more the religions, the richer we are, was the notion, was a unique idea. And to give that into a content and build into people's mind that this is what nationalism is, was a great experiment. The European idea of a narrow religion-based or ethnicity-based nationalism or language-based nationalism, unless it was contained, led to the Hitlers and the Mussolinis. It was contained by democratic movements in Europe. Where they did not succeed, it led to that. Now it is that vision, a foreign European vision of nationalism, is being projected as nationalism in India. Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. That was not our freedom struggle. For 100 years, not a single person in our national movement had this vision of our nation. The vision was, as I said, celebrating diversity. The most well-known Bengali poet or a Urdu writer or a Telugu social reformer like Viresi Lingam were also the greatest nationalists. There was no contradiction. So they were complementary. Now this was, as I said, a great achievement of our national movement. The fourth element of the idea of India was that India would have a pro-poor orientation. I'm using the phrase consciously, not socialist or communist. Though the socialist and the communist strands became very powerful in the national movement, but there was no consensus behind it. The consensus there was, of course, on a pro-poor orientation from Dadabhai Naoroji, his first book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. You read R.C. Dutt, you read Dadabhai Naoroji, Suryanath Banerjee, any of the early nationalists, Rana Day, they start with that position that British rule needs to go because it has caused poverty in our country. Right? Now this notion is given more content with Gandhiji, turn your face towards the Daridra Narayan, and then the socialists and the communists give more and more content to it. But on the whole, the consensus was a pro-poor face to the Indian nation. I'm mentioning these because all of these, as you will see, are under severe attack today. And the last element of the idea of India was that the modern India would be, quote unquote, modern. It would not be based on obscurantist, obsolete, superstition-based country, ritual and superstition-based, what Nehru called the scientific temper. And that would be the thing. The point I want to emphasize is that across the spectrum of the Indian national movement, and the Indian national movement was indeed a very wide spectrum, from capitalists at one end to communists at the other, Gandhians, left Congress socialists, socialists, communists, all variety, revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, they're all part of the national movement. Very divergent in their views on how to achieve freedom. But all of them were agreed on these 5 notions that I mentioned. The only people who did not agree with this were the loyalists and the communalists, whatever communalism they represented, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh. All right? That is why they have to destroy not only the stalwarts of the national movement, but the national movement itself. And that is why it is up to the historians to fight back. And that is why it is the historians who are most under attack. Whenever the RSS comes anywhere close to power, the first thing they do is to attack the historian. 1977 is when they first came to power, came close to power. As you know, the RSS merged with the Janata Party. And immediately they said that these textbooks written by the stalwarts of our, among our historians, people like Ramila Thapar, Satish Chandra, Bipin Chandra, R.S. Sharma, should be banned. So, I mean, there is a reason why historians' reality is under attack, because an unreal, imagined history has to be forced down the throats of our youth. Gandhiji chose Nehru as his successor because he saw Jawaharlal Nehru as one who represented and fought for each element of this fight of element of this idea of India most valiantly. And he also believed that he would be the best person after independence to implement these ideas in the newborn state. It was not going to be easy, and he thought he would be the best. As early as 1942, Gandhiji says in a meeting of the AICC, people say, Jawahar and I are estranged. As you know, Jawaharlal Nehru and Gandhiji used to have constant debates. Nehru's autobiography, written in the 1930s, reads like a critique of Mahatma Gandhi. And yet Gandhiji says that people say that Jawahar and I are estranged. This, he said, is baseless. And as it was typical of Gandhiji to use imagery which explained things much better than any amount of language would, sophisticated language would. He said, you cannot divide water by repeatedly beating it with a stick. Water doesn't get divided just because you beat it with a stick. And this is important because, as you know, if you now look at the public discourse of the current regime, almost every other day they find some reason to say how one Congress leader was fighting the other. Subhash versus Nehru, Gandhi versus Nehru, Gandhi versus Bhagat Singh, Patel versus Nehru, as if the national movement leaders were fighting amongst each other, not the British. In their narrow sectarian minds, or in their petty minds, they cannot even imagine our nationalist leaders who could have had diverse opinions and yet could bond so closely for a common ideal. And that's what Gandhiji is saying, that you cannot divide us just by beating us water. And he says, I have always said, not Rajaji, that is Raja Gopalachari, nor Sardar Vallabhbhai, but Jawahar will be my successor. When I am gone, he will speak my language too. As it happened with the murder of the Mahatma by a Hindu communalist, within months of India's independence, and Sardar Patel dying in 1950, the burden of implementing the idea of India to a very large extent fell on the shoulders of Jawaharlal Nehru, and he did a Herculean task on taking this burden on himself. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. When people critique Nehru, and the critiques have suddenly now emerged out of the woodwork, the numbers are multiplying rapidly. For example, from Tirthankar Roy to Meghnad Desai to now Panagria, his book you must have all seen. They've all now discovered that, oh my God, if only we did not have Nehru, where India would have reached economically. So as Meghnad Desai famously said, the first 40 years of India's independence were wasted years. Now, one must remind, none of them fortunately are historians. Historians would find it very difficult to say things like this. These are all economists and similar stuff. We must remember that when we evaluate a person or an era, it must be done in a manner that it is comparable with what you are comparing with. You cannot compare apples and oranges. In other words, you have to take what the economists call the initial conditions from which you start. Where does Nehru start from in 1947? You cannot say that, look, in the 1950s, look what England achieved, or look what America achieved. You are starting 100 years later or 200 years later. So how can that be a comparison? You have to compare with a similar era in the history of those countries. That's how comparisons are made. That is, spatially with other societies at the same levels of development, or in terms of time with the past. Now, if you do that, if you take the initial conditions, what Rabindranath Tagore, only as a poet could put it so well, shortly before he died, he said, the British will one day have to leave India. But when they do, what mud and filth will they leave behind? The mud and filth that they left behind was the following. A famine-stricken country, 4 million died just 4 years before independence of famine. 84% of your people illiterate, 92% of women illiterate, your per capita income shrinking for the previous 30 years, every year, annual shrinkage of your per capita income. The average life expectancy at independence, we forget, was less than 30, average. On an average, an Indian would die before he was 30. It includes the well-to-do and the not-so-well-to-do. So you can imagine at what age the poor must have been dying. Now that is what you're inheriting. On top of this, you're inheriting a country deeply divided on the basis of religion, with about 500,000 people slaughtered, over 6 million refugees pouring into the country. Now that's what he inherits at independence. On that, to build a secular, democratic, pro-poor, sovereign nation was indeed a stupendous task. And I want to highlight some of this because many of the challenges we are facing are similar. So lest we get overwhelmed, let us see that what the tallest of our nation did when they were faced with these challenges. The first challenge that came to the idea of India was at independence itself. The period 46 to 48 we describe as a Holocaust-like situation. With the great Calcutta killings, where the Muslims were massacred in Calcutta in 1946, further massacre of Hindus in Noakhali, then the reprisals in Bihar, massive massacres of Muslims, and then the Hindu-Muslim riots in Punjab, Delhi, the partition, and top it all, the murder of the Mahatma. And as Jawaharlal Nehru said, that the murder of the Mahatma was not an act of a mad individual. It's not just one fellow who went crazy and killed him. He said it was an act of an organization, and he meant the RSS, who were planning multiple such assassinations to create a further situation of disorder in order to do, it is his words, to do a coup and change the nature of the state. Because the state that India inherited as a result of the national movement, which was a movement for secular democracy, was a secular democratic state. Now, they wanted to use this situation of communal frenzy to now create a Hindu Rashtra. And it was the manner in which our leaders, who are now maligned, that's how I started with, how they stood up like a lion to fight this situation is something from which we can learn. Because our current situation is pretty similar from what we witnessed at independence. What did Gandhiji do? When, in my opinion, perhaps the biggest event in world history in the 20th century was happening, which is the transfer of power from Britain to India. Because with independence to India, virtually the entire colonial world broke up, one after the other. There are so many experts sitting here on Nehru. I can see Rajan, for example, who will probably support on what I am saying, that the empire system virtually broke up. So it was a major event. But when this transfer of power is occurring, where is the leader of the movement which is leading to the transfer of power? He's walking the villages of Noakhali, one remote district in Bangladesh. And when the leaders said, Mahatma ji, when will you return? We are negotiating this most complex transfer of power with the British. How long will you be there? His answer was, as long as it takes. And he was walking the street, the villages of Noakhali, trying to bring peace to the people for 4 months, from November 46 to February 47. What use is this independence? He said, if the soul of India is lost. The soul of India for Mahatma Gandhi was Hindu-Muslim unity. Then when independence occurs, there was a fear among the Muslims in Calcutta that there will be a massacre of the Muslims to revenge the 1946 Calcutta killings. And Suravardi, the leader of the Muslim League, went running to Mahatma Gandhi and said, "You have to protect the Muslims." He said, Gandhi agreed, and he said to Suravardi that I will walk with you in the streets of Calcutta so long as you walk with me. And both of them stayed in a house together, and Gandhiji walked the streets of Calcutta, and not one shot was fired. That is when Mountbatten said that Mahatma Gandhi was a one-man boundary force. He said, with all the military and the police, we could not prevent in the Punjab what Gandhiji was able to prevent single-handedly. So that was Gandhi. What does Nehru do? Nehru goes with his entire cabinet, virtually. Rajendra Prasad, Siddhar Patel, Kripalani, Jayaprakash Narayan, whole bunch. He takes them all and lands up in Bihar. And he says, until the riots in Bihar stop, we will not move from here. And the riots, the killings in Bihar had spread to the villages. The first time it was not only urban riots. And they were able to bring it down within a few days' time. Nehru, after Gandhiji's murder, what Nehru did was to take away the low-hanging fruit from the hands of the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha. They thought this was the time, because of the communal frenzy, to build a Hindu Rashtra. And Nehru did not allow that to happen. And that is one reason why they never forgive him till today. One reason why he's the biggest enemy is that when they came closest to Hindu Rashtra, Nehru just takes it away. He converts the first general election, 1951-52, into a virtual referendum, asking the people of India that, do you want India to be a mirror image of Muslim Pakistan? Do we want a Hindu Rashtra as a mirror image of Muslim Pakistan? Or do we want a secular India? And he traveled about 40,000 kilometers with no 8,000 crore plane. And he spoke to about 35 million people directly, as I speak to you, which meant 1 out of 10 Indians he addressed. So it was a massive campaign. I'm not saying that Nehru did it alone, obviously not. It was the legacy of the national movement. All the nationalist leaders did, but Nehru in the lead, without a doubt. And the result was that the Indian people overwhelmingly voted for a secular India. The communal forces, the Ram Rajya Parishad, Hindu Mahasabha, and the Jan Sangh, the predecessor of the current BJP, put together got only 6% of the votes and only 10 seats out of 485. That is, communalism had been pushed back. But it was not extinguished. And Nehru was deeply aware of that. And what I will do, which I've done extensively in the book, that Ram Manohar so kindly mentioned, is to take out 1 or 2 of the big lessons that Nehru tried to draw from his effort at challenging communalism. Immediately after the results of the first election, the first thing he said was that it's a great victory. We are very proud of it. It's a great victory, but we have to learn a few lessons. Number 1, he said, that we need not fear communalism. When we fight it directly, we win. He said, when we compromise with communalism, we lose. So we must, in other words, first lesson, do not compromise with communalism. Fight it openly, directly. Gandhi and Nehru were not afraid of the M word, the Muslim word, which almost every politician in India almost is afraid of, because they think they'll lose the Hindu vote. Gandhiji's last fast, just before he was assassinated, was on the single ground that until all the Muslims in Delhi who have been thrown out of their homes and their mosques have been damaged, unless they are returned to their homes and the mosques repaired, I will die. And such was the pressure that even the RSS had to sign, saying, yes, we will not promote further communalism. So they were not afraid of catching the bull by the horns, but as we are. And we must learn a lesson from that. So he says, do not compromise. What did we do? In fact, the current president of the Congress, Mallikarjun Kharge, put it in my mind very beautifully. He said, you cannot lick poison. कि थोड़ा चाट के देख लेता हूँ क्या होता है. If you lick poison, you die. Or whether you swallow a kilo of it, you still die. So in other words, do not play with communalism. And that is exactly what we did. In the 60s itself, in the States, a strange, promiscuous combination of communal parties with various other secular parties, including some parts of the left, joined hands to overthrow the Congress. And that happened at the national level for the first time during the emergency, where JP movement builds itself on the cadre of the RSS. And when JP is critiqued for it, that how come you are building on that, you're a socialist, one of the most popular socialists in the country at one time. How come you are working with the RSS? They are fascists. So JP said, if RSS is fascist, I am fascist. Gave credibility to a formation who were untouchables after Gandhiji's murder for the first time. You gave them legitimacy. You allowed them to come into politics. So much so that Janata Party allowed the Jansangh and the RSS to merge with the Janata Party. So for the first time, they come into national politics. We did it again in 1989, where a bunch of secular parties joined hands, including the left, unfortunately, again, saying that the Congress is more dangerous than the BJP. So to overthrow the Congress, they did that. And the BJP increased their tally from 2 to 80. And after that, what you are witnessing is history. So you do not compromise with communalism. And we pay the heavy price now for compromising for short-term benefits. You want to overthrow the next guy who's also secular, but in order to do so, you feel that if I compromise a little bit with the communalists, I'll be able to overthrow him. You get that short-term victory, but the long-term, you have damaged society as a whole. The second advice that Nehru gave was, having won the election, that we have to do two things. Use state power to combat these fascist forces, as they did. Nehru and Patel banned the RSS, put about 25,000 people of them in jail. But he said, putting them in jail and banning an organization is not enough. Because people, he said, who are moved by faith can only be challenged by a superior faith. So what he was offering to the people was the superior faith of a humane, kind, inclusive nationalism, as opposed to a narrow, hate-filled, bigoted alpha male nationalism that the other side was bringing. What did we do? We did neither. To give you an example, even after the Gujarat riots, when one could see on the walls what communalism is doing, 2004, the secular parties come to power. And they're in power for 10 years. But as that film says, nobody killed Jessica, nobody destroyed the mosque, nobody did the Gujarat massacres, nobody killed Justice Loya, nobody punished, nobody in jail. You did not use your state power. And neither did you, except minor attempts, do any massive ideological work. So a great opportunity was missed. The result is that today you can have people giving open calls for genocide. Open calls in front of police stations, asking people, don't buy TVs and this, that, and other, buy knives and talwars because we have to kill these Muslims. You must have seen those videos. If not, you must. Because this is happening in our society. It may not be happening in the south of India. But as we know that freedom is not divisible. We did not defend Kashmir. So when it comes to Telangana, probably there will be still fewer people left to defend. There are parts of the country where this is actually happening. And we must stand up and fight. Let me quickly go over the other few elements of the ideas of India. Democracy. For the national movement, what was democracy? The critical element in democracy for the national movement was free press, civil liberties, and the right to free association. This is there in the 1931 Karachi Resolution. Adult franchise, free press, civil liberties, right to free association. This is the heart of our constitution. All of it is being denied. There is no free press by a mile. You cannot hold meetings in most parts of India. That you can hold a meeting like this, you're not going to find it easy to hold a meeting like this in Delhi. Even in your own premises. The CPM could not hold a meeting in Harkishan Singh Surjit Bhavan, this is the private Bhavan, critiquing what was happening in the G20. The police came and disrupted it and put section 144. So leaders inside stuck inside, leaders outside stuck outside. No meeting goes held. So and this is what the national movement fought for from the beginning. The first person to go to jail to fight for the freedom of the press is Tilak. And he's put in jail for a few years. He comes out and he again does that till he's sent off to Burma. Gandhiji is put to jail on this. Bhagat Singh, on this ground. Their right to free press, right to their opinions. And the British would brought in this law, the section 124A of the Criminal Procedure Code, which we are now using on sedition, which we are now using against our own people. So democracy meant right to free speech, freedom of association. It also meant respect for the opposition. Again, if you were to draw from our national movement, this notion that Gandhi was a dictator and he did what he liked, etc. What an absurd notion. Everything that Gandhiji tried to do, he put to an open vote. He comes to the national movement and wants to begin the first big movement, the non-cooperation movement in 1920, and it is put to vote in an open assembly. And the non-cooperation, 1,120 people voted for Gandhiji's resolution for non-cooperation, and as many as 886 opposed it. Large number. There are several such instances. But I'll give you the most sort of telling example what respect of opposition means. As you know, the biggest movement we had, the final struggle which overthrew the British, was the Quit India movement, the Bharat Chodo Andolan, right? And when Gandhiji goes to speak in the famous Maidan in Bombay, where he gives the do and die speech, which is what led to the entire leadership being arrested and the Quit India movement starting. At that occasion, 13 communists were present. 3 of them got up and opposed the resolution, saying that the real enemy now is fascism, so we must now cooperate with the Allies. This is not the time to fight the British. The communists were anti-imperialist, but they were not willing to fight the British at that point of time. But the people had been aroused to a situation where they were ready for the national movement. So what does Gandhiji do? Immediately after the communists got down, he got up and he said, I admire these young people who have the courage to stand against the current and express their point of view, even if they were left alone. He says, this is what I have tried to do all my life. So he threw a protective cover over the communists who were doing the opposite of what he was doing. Now that is what is respecting an opposition, respecting the opposition. And Nehru drew on this completely. Nehru says, democracy to me is a non-negotiable value. He said, I won't give it up for anything, however laudable the objective. And that is why Nehru was able to create another unique event in Indian history, create a Nehruvian consensus after independence. There was a consensus from the capitalists to the communists on the path of development India would follow in the Nehruvian period. In other words, there was no civil war. Every revolution that you know of was followed by civil war. The French, the Russian, the Chinese, lakhs of people had to die. But the Indian Revolution was not. Because Nehru refused to push through, bulldoze through. I use the phrase very thoughtfully because that is the new frame today is bulldozing. He was unwilling to bulldoze through any of his own ideas, which he could have simply because he was had such prestige and led this government with an overwhelming majority. And the left critiqued him for that at that time. Say, why don't you use your influence to push through your ideas? Nehru refused. He said, if I did, we will impinge. Unless I can carry my people with me, however radical, however good the idea is, we will not do it. Democracy was sacrosanct. And that is what saved India from, as I said, a civil war situation. For him, the free press was sacrosanct. No cartoonist had to go to jail, even, or this stand-up comedian had to go to jail before they cracked a joke, as happens now. Or a journalist, like the Kerala journalist, who wants to go and report on Hathras is arrested on the way because he wants to go and report. I mean, this was unheard of in Nehruvian times. The parliament, the respect for parliament, he would sit through all sessions, answer each question. And when the opposition would demand, in the worst of times, while the 62 war is happening with China, he holds a special session of parliament to discuss and answers each criticism of him. It's worth having a look at it. Now you cannot even mention China. When they're sitting kilometers inside your territory, you can't mention them in parliament, not allowed. Security risk. You can't mention Adani. But we made a joke of our parliament. Now that was certainly not the case in Nehru's time. The cabinet, the parliamentary system, the free press, etc., all functioned. As Nehru said in 1950 for the opposition, he said, I want a strong opposition. Now he's saying this when he's already so popular. I want a strong opposition. I do not want India to be a country in which millions of people say yes to one man. You must have heard now that when you make any criticism of the current regime, a crowd will say, Modi, Modi, Modi. So Nehru is warning against it. That is not what a democracy is. Say yes to one man. And then he goes on to say, now the call is for opposition Mukt Bharat, Congress Mukt Bharat, NGO Mukt Bharat. So many of my friends, NGOs, people sitting here would understand this. Amnesty International Mukt, Andolan Jivi Mukt, Parjivi. Andolan Jivis are supposed to be Parjivi. That is, all those who struggle, do Andolan, are Parjivi is parasites. This is the Prime Minister's wisdom, by the way. Left liberal Mukt, it will take half the crowd away from this group at least. Khan market Mukt, etc., etc. It's Mukti from opposition that they're looking for. Most important for Nehru, freedom in academic institutions. I, as a professor who spent most of my life in the academic field, feel very strongly about it, and I think for the country it's very important. Nehru was very clear what academic institutions should be. He says in December 1947, while inaugurating or a convocation of a university, he said what a university should be. He said a university stands for humanism, for tolerance, for reason, for the adventure of ideas, and the search for truth. If the universities discharge their duties adequately, then all is well with the nation and the people. Yes. A university stands for humanism, it's there in the book, for tolerance, for reason, for the adventure of ideas, and the search for truth. If universities discharge their duties adequately, then all is well with the nation and the people. But, he says, again anticipating what is happening. He says, if the temple of learning itself becomes a home of narrow bigotry and petty objectives, how then will a nation prosper or a people grow in stature? What we have done to our universities and university system is precisely this. Narrow bigotry. We pick up students like my university, rated the #1 university even by this godforsaken government. Even now, it's picked up, attacked. Our students picked up, put in jail. My student, Omar Khalid, is in jail for 4 years without trial. The courts don't have the time for hearing his bail appeal. No trial, no charge sheet, 4 years in jail. From Kanhaiya to Omar Khalid to Sharjeel, a whole bunch of our students were put in jail. The faculty is harassed, their pensions, put, and worst of all, their curriculum dictated by politicians. In our times, if the UGC, they tried in 2004, before 2004, that is during the 1999-2004 period, the UGC tried to bring in a curriculum for the universities. And JNU was the first to get up and say, who are you to give us a curriculum? You are a funding agency. Aap paisa dijiye, curriculum hum banayenge. We would not permit our vice-chancellor to create a curriculum. Vice-chancellor may be an expert of one subject. He cannot be both a mathematician, a physicist, a historian, a psychologist. Curriculum is decided by departments. And here is some politician getting up with questionable degrees which get lost in subjects which do not even exist. Who tell you what history you should teach? That is what is happening to our universities. But this is not accidental. This is what all authoritarian regimes do. The first thing that Hitler did was attack the best university in Germany at that time, Frankfurt University, in exactly the same manner, as if somebody has read Peter Drucker, the management guru's essay on what happened to Frankfurt under Hitler, and followed everything word by word. This is what you do to students, this is what you do to opposition, this is what you do to faculty, and this is what you do to the course framework. This is what Erdogan is doing in Turkey, and this is what the great man is doing in our country. In a central university in Madhya Pradesh, an international seminar on as sort of straightforward as non-controversial subject like scientific temper, that was the seminar on, was not allowed because the RSS wing of the student, ABVP guys said that you've invited two people who are controversial. And naturally one of them had to be Muslim, Gauhar Raza, who was a CSIR, chief scientist of the CSIR. He was going to speak on, he's a poet, one of the finest intellectuals, not allowed to speak. The other was Apurvanand, a professor of Hindi in Delhi. They said, these are controversial people, this seminar cannot be held. The police came into the campus, prevented an online seminar from happening by just turning off all computers. This is India, just a few hundred kilometers north. Please, let us not come further south. Given the current attacks on the press, on civil liberties, on minorities, on the civil society organizations, the world is now talking of the democratic backsliding that is occurring in India. We are now described, not even described. Democratic backsliding means you are still a democracy. But the word democracy has gone out of our description. India is now ranked as an electoral autocracy. The last step before you become a full-blown autocracy. This is the VDEM Institute, the Swedish organization. But not only the VDEM Institute. The US Freedom House, the Economists Intelligence Unit, all of them have come to the same conclusion that India is no longer a democracy. The Freedom of Press Index, we are 161 out of 180, somewhere at the bottom, sandwiched between Venezuela and Russia. So you can imagine our freedom of press. I've got two more elements of the idea of India left. Coming to the issue of independence and sovereignty. And this is important. This is addressed primarily at the economists who are writing a lot of impolite language garbage on Nehru these days. Nehru at Independence says that India is now faced with a neo-colonial situation. You are politically independent, but you're still economically independent from the same forces from whom you became free. And that is what neo-colonialism is all about. You have formal political independence, but you have no economic independence. And that is said because at independence, in order to grow, you have to make some investment. In order to invest, you need machinery. India produced no machinery, virtually. 95% of even machine tools, pliers and wrenches had to be imported. Now that is not independence, Nehru. And that is why the Nehru-Mahalanobis strategy, the capital good, heavy industry-based industrialization in the first few decades. And the results are dramatic. When those who say the first 40 years are wasted, it's meant for them. If in 1947 you had to import virtually 100% of the machinery to make any investment, which means any growth at all, by 1960 you had to import only 43%. And by 1974, only 9%. You had unstructured colonialism. Bulk of your growth you could manage on your own. That is why India could have an independent foreign policy. Not because our leaders could make 9-hour speeches in the United Nations. That is why India could lead the non-aligned movement, in which about 100 countries participated, refusing to be junior partners to either of the two superpowers. It's a major achievement. It was, again, a global example to all the post-colonial societies in the world, that you can, after independence, still be independent from either of the two superpowers immediately when the Cold War started after the Second World War. And country after country tried to follow that example. I've argued in the book, the third unique thing that India does, that Nehru tries to implement a strategy of development which was unique in world history. That is, make the transition to industrialism and modernity with democracy and sovereignty. No country did that. Every country in the West which industrialized did it without democracy. England, with Dickensian oppression of the working class, democracy was miles away when England industrialized. The United States with slavery, the enclosure movements in England, forced collectivization in the Soviet Union, much worse force in China, 30 to 60 million people dead with the Great Leap Forward. And each country in the West which industrialized did it either on the backs of their working class and peasantry, and to the extent that they did not do it on their backs, they did it on the backs of the colonial people. When Britain was the first industrialized country in the world, I just want to remind you this, the first industrialized country in the world, 84% of what they invested to be the first industrialized country in the world came as tribute from the colonies. In other words, to that extent, they did not have to take it out of their own working class and peasantry. India, after independence, could not say, okay, now let's colonize quickly our little neighbors, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc. Because that was not part of the vision of future India. So no colonies, no oppression of the peasantry, land tax removed. During the entire colonial period, about 50% of the gross produce of the peasantry went as taxation. After independence, not even 50 paisa. There is a net transfer of income, in fact, that goes into agriculture, rather than expropriating surplus out of agriculture to industrialize. So it was a very difficult, unique model. To do it with democracy, to do it with sovereignty, no East Asian model. Let an authoritarian regime in partnership with the industrial bourgeoisie push through development, and then we will talk about democracy, the South Korea model. Not acceptable. Not the Japanese model. Will grow as a semi-sovereign country, as the base of the United States, for Vietnam, for anything they wanted to do all over the world, at 10% per annum from 1950 to 1970. Not acceptable. Anybody who argued this at independence, that let us try a model of development without democracy or without sovereignty or with semi-sovereignty, would have been in the dustbin. So nobody argued it. Not even the Tata Birla plan argued it, the so-called Bombay plan. Nobody argued it. So it was a unique success, which we must understand. I don't have the time now to talk about the other lies about Nehru on the economic front. The lie, for example, that he ignored agriculture. It's complete rubbish. You know, agriculture grew about 8 times faster in the Nehruvian period than the previous 40 years. The entire land reforms occur within 7 years' time with democracy. As the best expert at that time of what was happening in India, Daniel Thorner, said that it is often said that the first 3 plans ignored agriculture. He said it cannot be sustained. He said more change occurred in the first 20 years of India's independence in Indian agriculture than the previous 200 years. But this is a lie that everybody believes. Nehru ignored agriculture. Just because he did industry, it means he ignored agriculture. But I don't want to get into that. I think the important part I want to mention is, which is related to democracy and sovereignty, is that Nehru anticipated the knowledge revolution. He was deeply aware that we missed the first industrial revolution, we missed the second technological breakthrough in the world, we missed even the opportunity of the Second World War, which was used by a large number of countries to industrialize. The next opportunity we were not to use. So he anticipates the next opportunity he thought would be based on knowledge. So the first plan onwards, 1950s, is not only about building the dams and the steel plants. It is about setting up of the IITs, the IIMs, the All India Institute of Management, the Bhabha Atomic Research Center. By 1956, the first atomic reactor had gone critical. That is, in science, which was an area left barren by the colonial rulers, massive progress was made within the first few years. And not only in the scientific area, the National Physical Laboratory, National Chemical Laboratory, I'll turn blue in my face if I were to mention all the institutions that come up. But I do want to mention that it was not only the scientific institutions, the Lalit Kala Academy, the Sangeet Natak Academy, the National Institute of Design, the Film Institute were all set up in the Nehruvian period. The National Council for Applied Economic Research, so it was all areas. The building of a knowledge society, which he thought was absolutely essential if India was to remain in the race. Today, more than half our GDP is produced by the service sector. A large part of that is clearly based on knowledge. Our balance of payments would go for a toss if we did not have the huge amount of remittances that we receive from the West based on the knowledge that we export. Therefore, to now denigrate Nehru, that is to kick the ladder which you used to climb, to kick the people on whose shoulders you have arrived where you have arrived. It is not despite Nehru, it is because of Nehru that you have arrived where you have. To do that, in Hindi we call it namak harami. To say that the first 40 years of India's independence were wasted, as I said, is therefore a complete fallacy. Because they say it on the basis of people like Tirthankar Roy and Meghnad Desai and others, Panagriya, for them the world begins with the neoliberal turn in 1991 and the growth rates after that. So they said that if only we did not have Nehru and we could have started in 1950 like this, look where India would have gone. You have to be incredibly stupid to argue that. Because if in 1991 if 1950 we did the 1991 strategy, we would have been a banana republic. Nobody in the world argued that, not a single major economist. You know, just think of any big economist that you can think of. W. Rostov, Brian Redaway, Ian Little, anybody, nobody argued that. They said that the Nehruvian model is the right way. You know, a non-totalitarian way to make the transition. Now you're wise after the event, and you said that in 1950 we should have done the 1991 strategy. Similarly, if in the 1980s we continued with the 1950 strategy, it would be equally unacceptable, because the nature of world capitalism has changed, the nature of the Indian economy had changed. And that is why the consensus, the Nehruvian consensus from the left to the right that existed in the 50s and 60s shifted to the consensus for economic reforms in the 1990s. Again, there is a consensus. If there was not a consensus, a minority government of Narasimha Rao could not have made this huge economic shift. From Jyoti Basu, the left, right, China, India, everybody is now talking of economic reform, because the situation had changed. But not to see this is typically an economist's prerogative. Okay, last, the pro-poor orientation. Nehru explicitly stated that political democracy is not enough. If we do not have economic democracy, we do not have a democracy. As Gandhiji would put it, until you wipe the tear of every eye, you have not created a civilized society, right? So, beginning with the land reforms, which is strangely not seen as an anti-poverty measure, the community development program, the public sector, education and health being a public good. These were giant steps in the Nehruvian period towards a more equitable society. And we have failed miserably on this front, despite several times more resources available with us to be more pro-poor. We have abandoned our poor, and you don't need statistics for it. The images of people throwing their loved ones who died of corona into the river because they didn't even have the money to cremate them. The whole world saw that. The whole world saw how great man decided that in 4 hours' time there would be a lockdown in Delhi and in many cities. And people had to walk at 45 degrees temperature with their old, with their infirm, with their children, dragging them along, all the way from Delhi to Bihar. Again, the whole world saw those pictures, you know. And here we tom-tom about the number of billionaires we have, how we had the fattest Indian wedding, the most expensive wedding in the world done by one of our cronies. And nobody questions what kind of skullduggery has created these billionaires. If you question it in parliament, you're dead. Your parliamentary seat will be put at question. All this is being done, this tom-tomming of our 5 trillion economy, Vishwa Guru, etc., while in the global hunger index, we are below sub-Saharan Africa. We are 111 out of 125. We are among the lowest in South Asia, with Bangladesh at 81, Nepal at 69, Sri Lanka at 60. And we talk about this great economic progress that we have made with half our children malnourished. And we should be hiding our heads in shame rather than bragging about the greatness that we have achieved. We have abandoned the education and health sector to a rapacious private sector. We have destroyed institutions where people could get an education, people like me could get an education, like the JNU. If you got admission in JNU, you were paid. And I know dozens of students who, out of the scholarship they got, because of their low incomes, funded their families. They came from first generation learning families, children of agricultural laborers, rickshaw pullers and what have you. They had a place in a fine university, destroyed. Instead, you have the Ashoka, where to get a BA degree, not even engineering or medicine or anything, 50 lakhs. Some of you have your children there, so you know that I'm not lying. 50 lakhs, 40 to 50 lakhs. It doesn't belong to the country. So we've abandoned our poor. Our poor do not need an education. The elite can send their children abroad, and the rest can go to schools where there is no learning. Professor Shanta Sinha took me to a slum in Hyderabad itself, where the women, the mothers have got together to try and resist and argue that how is it that our children get no education? Up till class 9, they cannot even write their names. They go to school. We have nothing for them. Lastly, the scientific temper, a term which Jawaharlal Nehru first used in the discovery of India, and he described what he meant by scientific temper. Scientific temper is not producing engineers and doctors who would fund superstitious, fascist ideas. IIT directors, talking about, I can't even remember the obscurantism of these guys. This is where we've had and the scientific temper is in your constitution, Article 51A. You're supposed to be promoting a scientific temper. And this is when your Prime Minister can address a group of physicians and top Bollywood actors while inaugurating a hospital in Bombay. He can make this famous atrocious comment that we knew plastic surgery in ancient India. Otherwise, how did Ganesha get an elephant trunk? And nobody even got up and left, leave alone protest. What he did was grotesque. But what happened on the other side is equally grotesque. The intelligentsia spine appears to have disappeared. Nobody protested. And you could recognize the faces of the people because they're so well known. The top heart surgeon, the top neurologist, the top actors are all sitting on the front row. They were also sitting in the front row when Ram said, Dev se Desh and Ram se Rashtra happened. Grinning away. No wonder. And the Prime Minister is not the only one. Why blame the poor man? We had the governor of Bombay, a governor of Bengal, who, while inaugurating an engineering fair, look at the funny part. He says that in a modern hospital. The governor says it in an engineering fair. He says, you must have all heard of Arjun, of Mahabharata. Arjun, he says, had a nuclear tipped arrow. In an engineering fair. We had a nuclear tipped arrow. And for this fantastic discovery, he was promoted as the vice president of the country. No wonder we fought Corona with thali banging, with torches shining, saying, Corona, go, Corona, go. Go, Corona, go. With all RWA uncles, as Ravish calls them, organizing these demonstrations. Talking of Gomutra and Gobar, etc., not too many of them consuming it, I'm sure, and unsuspecting, unverified medicines by their favorite guru, which even the Supreme Court had to intervene and said that you can't sell them as cure for Corona. Now, this is what we did to fight Corona. In other words, our leaders, instead of lifting our people from the mud and filth that was left behind by the British, as Gandhiji, Nehru, and other stalwarts did, they are pushing our people back into the same mud and filth. Same mud and filth of ignorance, obscurantism, disempowerment, fear, unfreedom, and above all, communal hatred. Promoting it where none exist. We are witnessing in this in Telangana, in areas where the issues were not there, have now been suddenly brought up. this threatens not only the survival of our democracy, but we believe the survival of our nation itself. Our nation is being pushed towards a civil war. We have 200 million Muslims, right? Equal to the size of several European countries put together. And with bulldozers, with lynchings done in a manner that the Punjab and Haryana High Court had to suo moto take notice and say that what is happening right outside Delhi in the new area is, it appears, I'm using their words, it appears like ethnic cleansing conducted by the state. This is the High Court saying that what we are doing appears like an ethnic cleansing done by the state. So Harish Khare, again, not people like Desdrohis like us. Harish Khare is an acceptable journalist, editor of so many newspapers, etc., etc. Recently wrote to the RSS that look what you're doing. Are you aware that you're pushing the country towards civil war? Gregory Stanton, who does the Genocide Watch, who had anticipated the Rwandan genocide, he said, he warned in a US congressional briefing, this is what he says, that seeing what is happening in India, it appears to me that the beginnings of, by far, the world's largest genocide in history is about to happen. So it's not just the neighborhood uncle or the panwala or here and there. It is all building up towards something that we must pay attention to. And in saving our country from this civil war-like situation, from the destruction of not only, as I said, the idea of India, but of India itself, we have to revisit Gandhi and Nehru.
The lines we have for Manthan is, where the finest minds speak from the heart. And I think we provided that opportunity for India's finest minds to speak from the heart. And I'll be glad to take questions.
Sir, my question for you today, sir, is we want the Congress gone, we want the BJP gone, we want all parties who are older than 20 years gone. But about the question about the caste census that is being propagated today, because we've heard history and it is very refreshing to hear all the histories that we didn't know before. But in the contemporary times, in the context of today, I request you to shed some insights and light about all these politically driven ideas about conducting caste census on both sides of the aisle. What do you think about that, and doesn't that divide India, and therefore the parties, must rethink their strategy?
Yeah. Yeah. You've raised a very important question. Thank you. I mean, I'm aware I did not speak about caste. This was something that, again, if you will forgive me, we need to learn from our national movement itself. That they address the issue of religious division, not only national movement. We have to learn from our civilizational history, from our ancient past onwards, that the issue of caste and religious difference was, before the British came, was taken up. It was challenged. How did Buddhism come in? Or Jainism come in? It was a challenge to caste. How did Sikhism come in? Challenge to caste, challenge to religious division. If you read even 5 lines of the Guru Granth Sahib, you will find Ram, Rahim, and you don't know ye kiska hai ye. Which religion are you talking about, right? So there was this organic effort. And that is the civilizational history from which the national movement drew. And that is why we could have a democracy. As Amartya Sen in 2 of his books, Argumentative Indian and The Idea of Justice, repeatedly argues that it is not as if the Enlightenment happened in the West and we borrowed it. He asked the question that why is India a democracy? And he traces it back that there is a tradition from which we drew. It is this tradition which got interrupted with the coming in of the British. They solidified, crystallized the differences and exacerbated them, increased them rather than try to find a solution to them, right? And they did it for the religious division, they did it for the caste division. And the national movement from the beginning tried to absorb both. So if I symbolically take up Gandhi, one of the first thing he does, before he even comes to India, is to do what is the most unacceptable to the lower castes. That is clean the latrine used by other people, including Dalits, right? So untouchability, the worst indignities that were suffered by caste. He brings in the issue of the social issue of caste discrimination into the national movement. Earlier there were social reformers, the social reform movement was happening, the national movement was happening. Simultaneously, often coming close together, but there was a distance. Gandhiji removes that distance. In 1920, in the non-cooperation movement, he says, and with the reorganization of the Congress, what is the reorganization of the Congress? A 4-anna membership. That is, anyone can become a member. Number 2, you must take the oath of Hindu-Muslim unity and fight against untouchability from the very beginning. 1932, 33, 34, he goes around, says, I'm not doing any politics. I'm going to travel all over the country for several months. Going from one temple to the other, he never went to a temple. He sat outside the temple, argued with the priest that why can't you let? Where in the Shastras does it say that you cannot allow a Dalit to enter a temple? So what I'm saying is that this was brought into our national movement, and it is our duty. As I said, duty to save our secular society. It is equally our duty to remove this abominable discrimination against others on the basis of caste. I'm in total agreement.
Mostly say, but during Nehru's time, the first elected communist government was dismissed. What do you think of that?
Recently in Kerala, and this is the favorite question, that if he was such a good Democrat, why did he dismiss the government? If you look at we have tried to study it as historians, the measures that the communist government took up immediately, they were not able to handle. I'm not saying they brought in wrong measures, particularly on education. They took on the entire education system in Kerala, which, as you know, was heavily backed by the Christian missionaries as well as other religious, the Nair society, this, that, and the other, and they all joined hands. They called it the freedom struggle against the communists. So there was a popular movement. Don't put it on Nehru's head. This is a popular movement against the communists. And as I was told by a senior communist this time when I went there, that when the protests occurred, many of the protesters were, how do I put it softly, they were killed, they were butchered. And one of the top communists, he said he threw up. And the person I'm talking about is Damodaran. You probably heard of K. Damodaran, very close to P.C. Joshi. It is his statement that he threw up at the abominable task that he was being made to do, is to suppress this agitation. So there was an agitation there. The government was not able to handle. It is a view of some, including of S. Gopal, the biographer of Nehru, that Nehru probably did EMS a favor by throwing out the government rather than asking him to resign. Because that at least gave the communists a little cover that, it is not us, it is the center. If you take Nehru as a whole, he's not anti-communist. He's a communist himself. Even when the communists are abusing him, calling him the running dog of imperialism, he's asking the communists and the socialists, please come and join. He says, how can I take forward my radical program without your help? So it is most unlikely that Nehru would attack the communists. So I would say there is no direct answer. We don't have very much more. We are looking for it, a better explanation for this. But I want to give you a circumstantial explanation that it is not as if Nehru was anti-communist and therefore the government was overthrown. He was not.
Good evening, sir. as a group for showing this courage to have this program. I think you have, I would say that you have greater courage displaying that or talking on such a topic today. So my question is very innocent. I do not know whether it is right, but let me tell you, is it that it's not time ripe enough, or is it not that the intelligentsia of the South and the politicians, after coming to know about the delimitation programs and the tentacles that this present government is burrowing into the South, isn't it time for these people to ask for a separate South India? And as Mr. Mukherjee, would you have a sense of belonging to the South?
I have to go back to the North. But unfortunately, my battle is in the North, so I can't migrate to the South. I would much rather. But as for the South wanting to secede, this is something that was told to us by Montek Singh Ahluwalia in the 1990s, that if you look at the divergence on the path taken by the Bimaru states and the South, unless this is remedied, the South will one day want to secede. There is no doubt about it. But I think that is not the answer. The answer is of the intelligentsia of the South to fight to save the North. As I say, you cannot. The South will not survive, mind you, by letting the North go. We have not survived by letting Kashmir go. The country sat and watched democracy being butchered in Kashmir. And we are paying the price. It cannot happen. You cannot. You will see that if you let the North go, the South will also go. So we have to fight back. The question about the intelligentsia that is often asked, especially by young people, is that what can we do? The police is in their hands, the bureaucracy is in their hands, the judiciary is in their hands, the press is in their hands. What can we do? So all I can say is that, again, being a historian, that under British rule, the police, the press, the judiciary, the education system was far more in the state's hands than today. And yet, the intelligentsia could create a movement. It has to emerge. The intelligentsia has to grow again, a backbone. And there is no reason that the genius of the Indian people will not be reflected in a young intelligentsia that emerges, which will fight back.
Views and also observations on this vast subject. Sir, it's been, today every household is being ruled by the social media. So, and it's been flooded that, and it says that Nehru once claimed that he was an English by education, Muslim by culture, and Hindu by an accident of birth. How true is this statement? And my second question is regarding the World Global Index. You say that we are placed at the number 111. And the Modi government still continues to feed 80 crore Indians. So that amounts to more than 55% of our population since 4 years. So both these statements cannot be true.
Yeah, is that it builds itself on lies. Now this statement that Nehru said that I'm English by birth, this, that and the other, whatever, is a complete lie. In the RSS lexicon, they have another lie, which is now written about in Purushottam Agarwal's latest book called Who is Bharat Mata? Which is that Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Edwina Mountbatten went to the same college called Harris College in London. And Edwina would date Nehru in the morning and Jinnah in the evening, and he would play each other. And that's what they did eventually by dividing India. What a quite plausible argument, right? And then you investigate and you find that there was no Harris College. And if you look at the ages of Jinnah and Mountbatten and Edwina and Nehru, they could not have been in college together, unless somebody was a dimwit and needed 30 years, lead. So it is a complete imagination. So the RSS lexicon, look at their figures. According to the current figures, half the Indian people have been to the Kumbh Mela. According to their figures, there are more voters in Maharashtra than the number of voting population, no? So, I mean, our figures and statements are as good as what used to be China's, no? Nobody believed them. So please don't believe them.
I would like to point that India's population is 140 crores, 80 crores are hungry, the remaining are in Kumbh Mela.
When it comes to Adivasis, tribals and indigenous population. Because when Nehru came to power, even back in 1950s, there was Adivasi Mahasabha. And for example, the formation of Jharkhand, which was solely based on tribal population, it occurred in the year 2000. So I would like to know, like, what was it which resisted Congress from giving a separate state?
These are two different attitude towards either language or of tribes and Adivasis, etc. Okay, separate states issue we can discuss separately. Nehru's attitude towards the Adivasis and tribals was, I would say, an enlightened one. You know, not one of saying that these are backwards who need to be brought into mainstream, you know, and they would just run roughshod over their whatever traditional value system was. He valued it. He thought that much could be also learned from that, but they also had to have the opportunity that other people had of taking part of the changes in the rest of the world. That is, they are not to be kept as museum pieces, you know, and celebrated. Celebrate what they have, simultaneously give them the opportunity of choosing the path they want to choose and the manner in which they want to integrate with the rest of the country. That would be roughly the Nehruvian perspective, with which I have no disagreement. As for the states, the issue comes up much later. Just remember that at independence, the whole issue was how to not allow the breaking up of India. You know, you have just brought in something like more than 500 princely states, you know, into one union of India. So any demand for a state at that time felt like, my God, are we beginning the process of breaking up? So there was a resistance in the beginning. But over time, as legitimate demands for states came, they did happen. I mean, you saw the breakup of many regions into multiple states. Absolutely, absolutely.
About scientific temper, and I'm so glad you did this. As far back as, I think, the mid-60s and later in 1977, we had a very clear view of the, you know, a picture of what was to come with regard to scientific temper. In the mid-60s, there was this agitation by sadhus on ban on cow slaughter and how they were preparing to march into the parliament with trishuls and all of that. That was one. The other was in 1977 when the Janata Dal government came to power. At that time, you know, the person I'm going to talk about, Dr. P.M. Bhargava, Pushpa Bhargava, had been given this task of setting up a permanent exhibition on scientific method and propagate the idea of scientific temper, for which a very large area was made available at Bal Bhavan. It took him 2 years to put this interactive exhibition for students and older people alike to understand what is scientific temper, what is the scientific method, how do you become a rational being. The exhibition was ready and was about to be open to the public. Mrs. Gandhi lost the election. Janata government came in. Within a week of Prime Minister Morarji Desai becoming the Prime Minister, the entire exhibition was vandalized, ransacked, put in trucks, and thrown into a godown. This exhibition was done under the aegis of NCERT. It was the Congress government in Andhra Pradesh that brought it back, set it up here at the city central library in Afzalganj, and ran for many, many years. The point is that none of these people want rational thought, and that's quite clear with everything that's happening, including what's happening at the Kumbh Mela, because you don't want people to ask questions.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. And so with a regime like this, and you know, with what's happening, it's very, very, there's very little hope. I know we all have to fight. And you said, until intelligentsia stands up and fights. I want to ask you this one question. How many lost generations until then? I think we've already had one generation lost by the doings of this government.
What you have said, the Nehruvian ethos produced people like Professor Bhargava. You know, I mean, I see him as an extension of Jawaharlal Nehru. And they have to destroy that perspective, and they're doing everything that they're doing to destroy a questioning mind, which is what a scientific temper is. As I said, it is not producing scientists, but people with a scientific temper. They have to destroy it, and they're doing it ruthlessly, and you are absolutely right. We every day ask ourselves that don't they worry about what will happen to their children? What will happen to the next generation? We are producing morons, you know. I mean, this is what Nehru is saying, that how will the nation prosper if you do not allow people to think, question? So it is a very serious matter. I wish the intelligentsia would just look beyond their family. Mera beta to chale jaye America, baki jaye bhaad mein. It just doesn't work. It cannot work, you know. That's right.
War which you have quoted, like ethnic cleansing and all, the Umar Abdullah case which you have quoted, the 4 year, he is still in the, without trial, he is still in the jail. Sir, what if the people are habituated of this situation? Where will this, that will not amount to civil war at all when people are habituated of this situation. So I feel that we are habituated of this situation, and there is nothing situation like civil war exists as of now. And my second point is, sir, I want your view more on industrialization aspect which you were covering. You were telling that not even the Tata has raised the voice. So while we are giving importance to Nehru, we are ignoring the part which Tata has contributed to the economy. I felt little, so I want you to throw light on that, sir. Thank you. Economic contribution of Tata Group is more, and while we are giving importance to Nehru, are we ignoring that is my question, sir.
You see, the first part, the people getting habituated. You see, nobody ever in history has got habituated to becoming oppressed or a slave. It has not happened. The Americans thought that they will have the Vietnamese people habituated to being a colony, a tiny little place. You know, they thought the same about Iraq. They think the same about Afghanistan. It doesn't happen. It is not that the Kashmiri people are habituated. Go to Kashmir and talk to any Kashmiri you pick up on the road. There is rage inside him. He's being denied his freedom. People are not going to accept it. What the Indian Muslims have done is not that they've got habituated. Islam in India has been of a different kind altogether. It is not radical Islam. In fact, people have always wondered that why is it that radicalization is not occurring in India? Islam in India was of a different kind. We have had 700-800 years of a Sufi tradition. So that is one thing. And they've been patient. But that doesn't mean that if a people are patient, that you can go on bulldozing them. So that is what these people are saying, that if you push and if you push and if you push, then people will revolt. And the only possible way of revolting then would be a civil war. Have Israel and the entire might of the United States been able to get the people of Palestine habituated to be not a nation? They have not. Even Gaza, the people of Gaza, with the suffering that they have had, they are not habituated to it. It cannot happen. It's just that they have not boiled over in a manner. They must resist. They must find a way of resistance which is not civil war. But if they are pushed, we are headed towards a civil war. It is the duty of the majority, not of the Muslims. It is the duty of the Hindus to ensure that the minorities feel safe and part of this nation. And this is the message that Gandhi and Nehru repeated thousands of times, that it is our duty. This is what they call Tushtikaran. This is not Tushtikaran. To make the minority feel safe is the duty of the majority. As Nehru says, this is like the elder brother making the younger brother feel secure, rather than more and more insecure. But their perspective is to push them into violence and then say, see, we told you that they are a violent people, and therefore suppress them. Indian Muslims have not yet fallen into the trap. They've refused to violently respond to the violence being done on them. They've tried to resist electorally, they've tried to resist in every other way, and that is the only way we can resist. We cannot resist by counter-violence. If the minority does counter-violence, they are finished.
నెహ్రూ అండ్ కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీ విడదీయరాని అనుబంధంతో పనిచేశారు, ఒక ఐడియల్స్తో పనిచేశారు మీరు చెప్పినట్టుగా. ఇప్పుడున్న కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీని ఎలా చూస్తారు? ఇప్పుడున్న కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీ బాధ్యత ఏమిటి? చాలా మీరు చెప్తున్నప్పుడు అదొక ప్రపంచం, సెక్యులర్, డెమోక్రసీ, ఫ్రీడమ్ ఇవన్నీ చూసిన అమలుపరిచిన కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీ అండ్ నెహ్రూ ఇప్పుడున్న పార్టీలు, ఇప్పుడున్న నాయకులు అదే పార్టీలో ఎలా చూస్తారు? మీరిచ్చే సలహా ఏమిటి?
ఇన్ నెహ్రూస్ టైమ్
Okay, Venkat's question was when Congress party in the initial stages and throughout the freedom movement stood for certain values, what Aditya expounded. He wanted to know the perspective of the present Congress party on the same ideals. Are they following it, or they're on a different path altogether? Secularism, independence, sovereignty, whatever Aditya said.
I've known Venkat Reddy for more than, 20 years, and he always asks difficult questions. And what questions which can be embarrassing, right? And there are a number of young Congress leaders here. So, but I must honestly answer your question. Even in Nehru's time, he would say that there are people in my party who with one foot in the other side, and I must resist. He was aware of it, and he resisted, he fought back. That is why does Nehru have to keep on saying that do not compromise if nobody was compromising? Why does he tell the Congress party do not compromise with communalism? So there were people then, he fought back. There are people now, and I must say that the leader of the Congress party is fighting back. Give me a louder voice than Rahul Gandhi today, who's fighting Modi. Give me a louder voice. Is the CPM doing it? Is CPI doing it? Is somebody else doing it? Who is doing it? So, but this is not to say that there are not large number of congressmen who are weighing their options. Do I take a BJP ticket or do I take a Congress? Of course, that is also there. So in this reality, if we are to draw a lesson from Nehru and Gandhi, we have to bring about that change within ourselves as we try to bring it outside. I think that is the approach the Congress must follow.
Sir, as he asked, if you observe, every day I observe what is happening in the parliament, in YouTube. The speeches delivered by Mr. Rahul Gandhi clearly says whatever you said. Clearly says whatever you said. He has to speak for 30 states, he has to speak for center also. And of course, nowadays some Bengali people are asking. My question is, before that I will tell you one thing, small. I met L.K. Advani in Delhi. I offered my visiting card. I said, sir, I am a congressman. What he said, we are all colleagues in the parliament. We are all colleagues in the parliament. The same L.K. Advani gave a press conference that people who are asking questions against the ruling government, they are all Naxalites. L.K. Advani, who was a leftist, what he said. But what happened today? Very few Congress people are here. They know that meeting is going to be held about Nehru at Manthan. How many people are here in Congress people? There is no problem in Telangana, there is no problem in Tamil Nadu, there is no problem in Karnataka, there is no problem in Kerala. We will not allow these forces to come. But, yeah, that's why don't worry about civil war, sir. And I request you to give a motivational proverb to make people to fight against, I am not telling you to fight against BJP. Give a motivational slogan and everything to fight against evil because they are spoiling and dividing the whole country.
With evil. And we must all join hands to fight evil, whichever party we are in. Agreed.
Firstly, I thank Manthan for giving me this opportunity, and I am honored to talk with a renowned historian like you from JNU. My question is about the legacy of Nehru. The shackles of it are broken by his own daughter, Indira Gandhi, where she superseded him in some aspects, and I think even now it can't be touched, what she has produced. So I want you to address that. There may be a period like emergency, but I don't think that it has affected India. So I want you to talk about Indira Gandhi also.
I think the audience is ready to listen to a talk on Indira Gandhi. But if you are a congressperson, I'm glad you're raising the question. You need to be able to talk about the emergency. Why it happened? And, what are the forces that created a situation that there was an attempted coup on an elected government, and the opposition, riding on the backs of the RSS, said that your elected government we do not accept. Either you go or we'll do a siege. We will ask the police and the army to revolt. What is it but a coup? This is not to defend the emergency, but to say that it happened in a context. Historians have said that in that context, she should have called an election now and not waited the 6 months. Indira Gandhi had told JP and others that, look, there is only 6 months to the election. If you are so convinced that I am evil, wait for the election. They said, no, you have to go now. She didn't agree, so she called the emergency. But Professor Bipin Chandra, who has written a whole book on the subject, he says that that was not correct. She should not have called the emergency. She should have called an early election. So there was a mistake, undoubtedly, but it has a context. You don't have to be defensive about it. If you talk of the emergency, simultaneously you must talk about the fastest attempt at overthrowing an elected government. And the undeclared emergency. No. Absolutely, absolutely.
I'll make one observation and just have one question. So the observation is the path to a political public life for contemporary youngster is not as easy and as direct that it's made to look like. So at least like I have been on a personal path discovering where a meaningful, educated, middle class youngster can participate in the political space, and it's not direct and easy. I'd love to hear opinions that differ and give me a different perspective. The second question is, I was engaging with the National Congress leadership recently, and they precisely gave the answer that you gave. What is the way ahead for Congress is to looking back to where they started. So they started a path called Ahimsa Ke Raste, led by Sachin Rao and Siskan Sindhil, where they are trying to create spaces for youngsters to reflect on their inner path to politics. But do you think that's the way, going back to where we started, does that answer many questions? Like many of us have been raising questions which are different from what Gandhi and Nehru faced. So going back to Gandhi, going back to Nehru may answer few things, but I don't think they'll really help us solve contemporary issues. So is that the...
I mean, that is the big question, that what does a young educated person who wants to participate in today's politics, how do you do that? There is no entry. You are not a Thekedar, you don't have enough money, you can't buy votes, neither are you a Bahubali who can buy a bully and into votes. So how do you enter politics? Surely. But I'm saying that the challenges faced today are not identical to the challenges faced by Nehru and Gandhi, but the challenges they faced were not any smaller than the challenges faced today, is what one is saying. Therefore, what we can draw from them is not a blueprint of exactly how to fight it, but certain guidance on the path one is to follow, and also a sense of hope and a linkage with one's history. There is no way one can fight an existing system unless one is able to link up with existing movements before. Every movement in the world, every revolution, have tried to link up with earlier things. And today's Congress party needs to do that. Firstly, they need to read about the national movement. They don't have a clue, as you must be aware. If from a party which has become a party of elections, as it is called, and people are joining the Congress because they want a seat and they want a contract, etc., to a party of struggle back again. It was a party of struggle then. Now is a time when you have to be a party of struggle if you are to overthrow the state. Let us accept it. We are in a fascist situation or a semi-fascist situation. In that situation, politics cannot be as usual. Either there is the politics of joining their hands or the politics of struggle. But vast numbers of the young congressmen haven't got the hang of it yet. They do not see joining as joining a struggle. That means there will be a sacrifice. You're not going to get something out of it. You're going to lose something. And that is what almost every nationalist from the 19th century did. They lost enormously. They lost their jobs, they lost their professions, they lost their properties, etc. In order to create this great movement, the greatest mass movement in world history. So we need people who are willing to lose something. And this is not to say that you have to be revolutionary, and go to jail, this, that, and the other. Short of that also, I think there is a large area where the young people can express themselves, and by doing so, pay a cost. That is willingness to pay even a cost. If Congress people are identified as those who are willing to pay a cost, you'll immediately stand out as a different brand of people. That is what our hope is, that we will have a young sort of bunch of people who stand out, pay a cost in order to save the country.
While I understand that Nehruvian socialism was a product of its time, given the economic condition of the country right after independence and whatever was happening around the world, I understand that Panditji was inspired by a mix of different movements across the world. But do you think that with its focus on self-sufficiency and state-led development, it ended up limiting India's ambition and the population's ambition by prioritizing basic needs over bold economic growth, and leading to, right now, almost a good chunk of the country still struggling with poverty and basic meals?
Broadly, but let me go over briefly what you are saying. What Nehru tried to do, the path that he followed, was in that situation a necessary path. If you were going to be sovereign, if sovereignty was an important issue, then you could not become a junior partner and have an available export market. The export pessimism that was faced by countries like us was because there was no export market. Now that situation changed by the 70s and 80s. And therefore the need for economic reforms. So what you needed at that time was a necessity. The public sector was a necessity. Before independence, what is called the Tata Birla Plan, the Bombay Plan, which was signed by every major industrialist in the country, asked for a large public sector, almost as if the second plan was being written in the 1940s. Because they saw the public sector as the only way of resisting foreign capital. Nehru saw the public sector as A, resisting foreign capital, and B, a step towards socialism. Now, in order to make it a step towards socialism, he wanted the support of the socialists and the communists. But the socialists and the communists at that time felt that supporting Nehru would be reformism. They did not. So he lost, in a sense, the instruments which could have made the state policies that he brought into being into a further step towards socialism. So that's roughly the broad paradigm within which we need to look at the Nehruvian period. Once the situation changes, once we are in a position of bargaining within ourselves, as I said, when we produce enough capital goods ourselves, when we can bargain with the international world internally, and the global capitalist world has changed, the nature of foreign capital has changed. You know, it is the foreign capital coming into the countries now was internationalizing production. They were exporting the multiplier effect to the countries where the foreign capital is going, which is a completely new phenomenon. That is not what it was earlier. It led to the whole world making a shift. I'll give you one brilliant story, not story, observation by Cardozo. Cardozo, as you know, was the Brazilian president who brought Brazil out of military dictatorship into democracy and into globalization. Cardozo, like Manmohan Singh, was a professor. But unlike Manmohan Singh, he was a Marxist, he was a leftist, he was a left dependency thinker. One of the major thinkers of the left. So he came to India in the 1990s when the economic reforms had just started. And he met a bunch of intellectuals. And as you know, on the right, there are very few that you can find. So the intellectuals he met had a large number of the left in it. So he was asked this question, that Professor Cardozo, you being a Marxist, you being a leftist, how did you bring Brazil into the globalization process and economic reforms? I mean, they were really very upset. So Cardozo said that you are asking me the wrong question. Whether to globalize or not is a wrong question. If you don't globalize in the post-Iron Curtain, post-Bamboo Curtain era, Soviet Union has collapsed, etc., etc., in the current situation, if you don't globalize, you will become a Myanmar. So globalization is a fact. The question you should ask as a leftist is, how do I globalize? Do I globalize with my sovereignty intact? Or do I globalize by disappearing into the armpit of the United States? Second question you should ask is, how do I do my economic reforms and the economic restructuring, etc., and globalization? Do I do it with a safety net for the poor? Or do I do it by abandoning the poor? These are the questions you should ask. And then he went on to say, I must say very wisely, that India has an advantage over Brazil in this respect. And our intellectuals were flabbergasted that how can we have an advantage? After all, everything is wrong with us, isn't it? So he had to tell us that your advantage is that you have a long tradition of resistance. And he says, beginning with Gandhiji, then Nehru, then the left, you have a long tradition of resistance, and your people are not going to allow a transition towards economic reform which abandons your sovereignty and which abandons the poor. Absolutely prophetic words. The moment 1991 economic reforms start, every civil society group in India is saying, what about the poor, what about the poor? And you look at the Manmohan Singh era, every radical legislation, right-based legislation, right to information, right to employment, right to food, right to education, all of them come there, under civil society pressure, under democratic pressure. So we had a shift in economic strategy without abandoning the Nehruvian principles of sovereignty and equity. Now we have another shift because we have taken away democracy out of our system. So we can now sell ourselves to the United States. As we do, we can buy their thrown away stuff at huge prices. And we can abandon our poor. Because the democratic right to resist has been taken away from us.
Thank you, Aditya, for that wonderful lecture. And thank you everyone for being here.